Maybe you are sitting on the edge of the bed right now, feeling that strange, sharp pinch of shame that comes when you look at the calendar and realize you have not achieved what you promised yourself you would. Your hands are resting on your knees, but your mind is already miles ahead, scouring the future for signs of failure. You might feel the weight of a long, dry season in your own heart, a sense that you should be showing signs of vibrant life, yet you find yourself brittle, quiet, and seemingly stuck. The room is dim, and the air feels cool against your skin. Outside, the world is hushed, but inside, there is a frantic, internal clock ticking away, telling you that you are falling behind, that you are missing the light, and that your quietness is a sign of fading. You have spent so much energy trying to force your own blossoming. You wake up and reach for the sunlight. You push your roots into the hard, packed earth of your own expectations. And when you do not see the results you crave, you turn that frustration inward. You blame yourself for not being more productive, for not being faster, for not being more capable of constant, sunny growth. But look at the orchard in the high mountains. When the frost begins to bite, the trees do not panic. They do not judge their own branches for being bare. They know something that your busy mind has forgotten. The Buddhist insight we are turning toward tonight is this, that your worth is not a crop to be harvested by the world. It is the very soil from which you grow. When you feel this deep, hollow fatigue, it is not proof that you are failing. It is proof that you are human, and that you have been operating under the illusion that life must be a perpetual summer of green leaves and heavy fruit. But the most vital work of the soul happens in the dark, in the quiet, in the cold, and in the moments where you have absolutely nothing to show for yourself. Tonight, we are going to look at the wisdom of the dormant season. We are not here to fix your progress or to build a better version of your productive self. We are here to help you understand that the parts of you currently feeling bare are not dead. They are resting, and they are preparing for a life that is much deeper than the frantic, surface-level growth you have been demanding of yourself. You are not broken. You are simply in a season that the world does not have the patience to understand. And because of that, you have been hard on yourself, thinking your dormancy was a deficit rather than a requirement. If it feels right, let your hands loosen their grip on your knees. Let the tension in your shoulders drift down into the mattress. You do not have to hold the sky up tonight. You do not have to be the one who ensures the harvest. You have been carrying that burden for a long time, and the weight has become a familiar, jagged stone in your pocket. But tonight, that stone can stay on the bedside table. You are not required to provide answers. You are not required to solve the riddle of your productivity, and you are not required to justify your existence through achievement. Maybe you have felt this specific kind of restlessness, the kind that whispers that if you stop moving, you will be forgotten. It is a lonely, cold whisper. It comes from the fear that your value is tied entirely to what you produce for others to see. But what if the most sacred part of your life is the part that no one ever sees? What if the peace you are looking for is hidden in the very thing you have been trying to prune away? Your own need to be finished, perfect, and flourishing. The paradox of the orchard is that the fruit does not come from the tree's desire for fruit. It comes from the tree's commitment to its own nature. When you stop trying to dictate the rhythm of your own growth, you allow the deep, ancient intelligence of your body and your spirit to take the lead. You are not a machine meant to run on an endless, flat line of performance. You are a cycle You are a series of ebbs and flows, of green leaves and brown bark, of high energy and essential stillness. When you fight the stillness, you fight the very thing that sustains you.
Take a slow breath.
Not to change the way you feel, but simply to mark the fact that you are here, in this room, in this night. Notice the way the breath fills you, then leaves you, a natural, rhythmic cycle that requires no supervision. You do not tell your heart how to beat, and you do not tell your lungs how to expand. This intelligence is already working within you. It is the same intelligence that governs the mountain, the stream, and the changing of the seasons. It has been there all along, underneath the noise of your plans and the heat of your self-judgment. You might notice thoughts rising, little reminders of what you still need to do, or how you should have behaved today. Just notice them. Do not try to strike them down, and do not invite them to stay. See them as leaves falling from a tree. They are part of the process, but they are not the tree itself. You are the tree. You are the deep, solid wood that remains when the leaves are gone. You can watch the leaves fall without feeling that your life is ending. Everything you are feeling right now is part of the landscape. It is not an error in the system. It is just the weather. There is no need for you to rush to the ending. There is no need for you to force your way into a brighter season before you have fully experienced the quiet of this one. You have walked a very long way to reach this moment, and the simple act of sitting here, letting the weight of the day settle, is the first step toward a new way of existing. You do not have to know where this leads. You do not have to see the next season on the... For tonight, it is enough to know that you are safe in the dark and that the ground beneath you is solid. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be exactly as you are, a living being that is currently experiencing the quiet, necessary winter of the spirit. There is no urgency here. There is only the slow, steady turning of the night and the gentle permission to finally stop being the master of your own life and start being its most patient guest. In a moment, we will look at the story of an old orchardist, a man who lived on the high slopes and spent his entire life trying to force the mountain to bow to his schedule. He was a man, much like yourself, driven by a love for his trees, but blinded by his fear of the cold. His journey, and the lesson he learned beneath the mountain stars, is a doorway into the peace you are looking for. But first, let yourself breathe. Let the stillness of this room be a shelter. You are not being asked to change anything tonight. You are only being asked to let the truth of your own life be held in the silence. You have done enough for today. The garden is waiting. The night is deep, and you are finally ready to be still. In a high, windswept valley where the mountain air bites with the crispness of early frost, there once lived a man named Kaito. He was the steward of a vast, sloping orchard that clung to the jagged terrain like a stubborn green dream. For years, Kaito had been obsessed with the timing of the seasons. He believed that if he could only track the sunlight with absolute precision, he could command the trees to yield their fruit on his schedule. He carried a heavy, iron pruning blade, a tool that had been passed down through generations of orchardists. It was scarred, uneven, and cold to the touch, and Kaito treated it like a scepter. Whenever a branch looked thin or a patch of kale struggled against the rocky soil, he would march out with his blade, convinced that he needed to cut away the weakness to ensure the orchard's survival. He never slept soundly. In the dark hours before dawn, he would sit in his small, drafty cabin, listening to the mountain wind he would feel a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach because he believed the orchard was failing. He looked at the trees and saw only the parts that were not growing fast enough. He saw the yellowing leaves as personal failures. He saw the slow, deliberate pace of the mountain as a threat to his own reputation as a capable steward. He was convinced that if he stopped watching, if he stopped cutting, the entire orchard would collapse into a tangled, unproductive wildness. One evening, when the sky was the color of bruised plums and the first true frost of the year had turned the grass into a field of silver needles, Kaito found an old man sitting at the base of the highest terrace. This was an ancient traveler who had no home and no tools, a man who walked the ridges simply to watch the clouds move. Kaito, his hands raw from cold and his mind racing with lists of repairs, stood over the man, his iron pruning blade hanging heavily from his belt. The traveler was not looking at the trees. He was looking at a bundle of dried, leafless twigs he had gathered from the ground. They were brittle, grey, and completely dormant. The traveler held one of the twigs up to the fading light. He did not speak for a long time. Kaito, feeling the familiar, impatient itch to correct the man's inactivity, finally blurted out that the orchard needed work, not watching. He pointed to his own trees, which stood stark and skeletal against the horizon, and asked how the traveler could sit still when there was so much that needed to be shaped, forced, and salvaged before the winter truly took hold. The traveler smiled, a slow, creased movement of his lips, and reached out a gnarled hand. He gestured for Kaito to sit. Kaito hesitated, his pride bristling, but the sheer heavy silence of the mountain made him sink onto the frosted earth. The traveler handed him the twig. It felt light, almost weightless, in Kaito's palm. It was stripped of everything that made it look alive. There were no buds, no leaves, no promise of color. It looked like a spent matchstick, a piece of detritus that had no purpose in a productive orchard. The traveler asked Kaito a single question, his voice as quiet as the rustle of dry grass. He asked, "What do you think this wood is doing right now?" Kaito scoffed and said it was doing nothing, that it was dead, a broken remnant of a branch that had lost its chance to bear fruit. The traveler took the twig back and held it against his own warm cheek. He told Kaito that the wood was doing the most important work of its entire existence. It was pulling everything that mattered inward. It was closing the doors, sealing the paths, and retreating into the absolute center of its own being to survive the coming freeze. The old man explained that the tree was not failing because it was bare. It was preparing. If the tree tried to keep its leaves, if it tried to continue the outward push of summer while the frost was setting in, it would shatter. The dormancy was not an absence of life. It was a massive, concentrated movement of life back into the roots. Kaito looked at his own hands, calloused and gripped tight around the handle of his iron blade. He felt a sudden, strange ache in his chest, a realization that he had been trying to force his own life to stay in the green season of perpetual, visible growth. He had been terrified of his own bareness. He had been terrified of the moments when he felt dormant, empty, or unproductive, seeing them as the death of his purpose rather than the necessary foundation of his endurance. The traveler stood up and laid the bundle of twigs on the cold stone of the terrace wall. He told Kaito that the orchard did not need a master who treated dormancy like a plague. It needed a steward who could respect the wisdom of the freeze. The man walked away into the deepening mist, his footsteps silent on the hard, frozen ground. Kaito remained on the terrace, the iron blade still at his side. But for the first time in his memory, he did not feel the need to stand up and start cutting. He looked at the trees. They were not dead. They were just, like the twig, holding their breath. They were in the middle of a secret, vital labor that required no output, no performance, and no justification for the world to witness. The orchard felt different now. The dark skeletal lines of the branches against the dusk did not look like failure. They looked like a choice. They looked like a form of courage. Kaito realized that the anxiety he felt whenever he stopped working was the fear of being seen in his own winter. He was so afraid of being thought of as idle that he had been wounding his own soul, cutting away his natural rest just to maintain the appearance of progress. He reached down and touched the twigs the traveler had left behind. They were cold, but beneath the surface, they were still wood. They were still connected to the roots. They were still waiting for the cycle to turn. He stood up, but he did not reach for the blade. He walked to the edge of the terrace and looked out over the valley. The wind had died down. The entire mountain seemed to be holding its breath. In the moonlight, he felt a long, slow sigh escape his lungs, a sound he hadn't realized he was holding for years. He did not know how to be a steward who did nothing, but he knew with a sudden, sinking certainty that he could no longer be the steward who destroyed everything. To keep it looking alive, he left the bundle of twigs on the wall, a small, silent monument to the work that happens in the dark, and walked back to his cabin, his hands finally hanging loose at his sides. The cabin was dark, but it was not empty. It was filled with the stillness of the mountain. Kaito did not light the lamp. He did not start planning the next day's labor. He sat on the floor, his back against the rough wood of the wall, and watched the silver light of the moon creep across the floorboards. He felt the fatigue of a lifetime of holding on, and he realized he could finally let it go. He did not have to earn his rest. He did not have to prove. He was still a good gardener by being awake and busy. The trees were resting. The earth was resting. And for the first time, he was resting too. The lesson was not in what he had done, but in what he was now allowing himself to stop doing. The wood, the frost, and the silence were all teachers. And he was finally, after so much distance, a student of the season. This story of the orchardist and his iron blade is not a call for you to abandon your responsibilities or to stop caring for the things that matter in your life. It is not an invitation to become distant or cold to the world. It is something much more intimate than that. It is an invitation to notice the way you handle your own life when the seasons of change arrive. Kaito was not a bad man because he wanted his orchard to thrive. His struggle began the moment he decided that the health of the trees depended entirely on his own relentless, exhausting vigilance. He looked at the natural cycle of the mountain, a cycle that included rest, cold, and a deliberate drawing in of energy, and he labeled it a threat. He thought he was defending the trees, but he was actually fighting the very reality that allowed them to survive the frost. Often, we do the same thing with our own pain and our own periods of low energy. We treat our internal winters, those times when we feel tapped out or uninspired or simply tired, as if they are invaders that must be chased away with an iron blade. We believe that if we are not constantly showing signs of growth, or if we are not constantly productive, then something has gone wrong in our own nature. We treat our own need for stillness as a defect in our character. We layer a second kind of suffering over the first. The first pain is the natural fatigue, or the disappointment, or the loss that life inevitably brings. But the second pain, the one that truly exhausts us, is the judgment we layer on top of that initial experience. We tell ourselves that we should not be feeling this way, that we are failing because we are not blooming, and that our worth is tied to how much we can force out of ourselves before the day is over. Think of how Kaito squeezed the twig until he believed it was dead. You do the same when you refuse to let yourself rest, or when you berate yourself for needing time to heal. You are trying to hold on to the leaves of last season, long after the wind has turned cold. But the wisdom we are exploring here is that your life is not a fixed monument. It is a shifting, breathing reality that requires different things at different times. Sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is to stop the harvest and let the fields lie fallow. This is not weakness. This is the deepest form of intelligence. It is the intelligence of the earth that knows exactly when to stop reaching outward and when to pull everything back toward the root to protect the core. When you feel that familiar itch to start cutting, to start fixing, or to start forcing an outcome, ask yourself if you are acting out of a genuine need to care for your life or out of a desperate fear of being seen in your dormancy. Often, we are just afraid that if we stop moving, the world will see us as empty. But emptiness is not a void. Emptiness is a state of possibility. It is the wide, open clearing where the next season can eventually take root. If you are always full, if you are always busy, and if you are always wearing the mask for someone who has everything under control, there is no space left for the new to emerge. This is what it means to stop adding a second wound to the first. You cannot stop the frost from coming. You cannot stop the days from growing shorter or the energy from waning. These things are the natural rhythm of the human experience. But you can stop the internal war you wage against these shifts. You can stop holding the iron blade against your own heart, demanding that it pulse with a speed you are no longer built to maintain. You can recognize the feeling of pressure, the tightness in your chest, and the frantic ticking of the mental clock. And you can name them for what they are. They are just shadows passing over the orchard. They are not the tree. They are not the roots. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence is often misunderstood as a cold realization that everything ends. But its true gift is much warmer. It is the reminder that because everything changes, nothing is locked in place. The season of struggle you are in right now is not a permanent state of being. It is just a temporary shift in the landscape. It will move on, provided you stop trying to freeze it in time through your resistance. By clinging to the idea of where you should be, you lose the ability to see where you actually are. You lose the chance to learn the lessons that are only available in the quiet, colder parts of your life. Think of the way you handle your own thoughts. When a feeling of failure or inadequacy drifts into your mind, you do not have to pick it up and sharpen it like a blade. You do not have to walk through your day carrying it, waiting for a chance to strike at yourself. You can notice that the thought has arrived. Recognize that it is a common visitor in the mind of someone who cares about their work, and then gently let it settle. You do not have to believe every story your mind tells you about your own life. Just because your mind says you are falling behind does not mean you are. It only means you are listening to a mind that is currently afraid of the cold. This process is what it means to be the steward of your own presence. It is the act of stepping back from the frantic pace of your own expectations, to see the larger, slower, and much more resilient life that is happening beneath the surface. You are not a machine that produces worth. You are a living system that is constantly adapting to the environment of your days. Sometimes the environment demands heat, and sometimes it demands a deep protective frost. Both are necessary, both are holy, both belong to you. You have been working very hard to be something you are not, and that is why you are so tired. You have been trying to stay in the green season all year long, and the effort has drained you. But tonight, you are being invited to let go of the blade. You are being invited to recognize that your current state of being, no matter how quiet or how slow or how bare it may feel, is exactly the state of being that your own nature requires to prepare for what comes next. You do not have to provide the fruit today. You only have to provide the space for the root to stay healthy. Notice how the body responds to this realization. If you are honest with yourself, there is a part of you that has been waiting for this permission to simply sit down and stop trying to prove that you are alive. That part of you is weary of the performance. It is ready for the honest, quiet work of the winter. As you continue to listen to these words, allow yourself to stop checking the results. Let the orchard be dark. Let the branches be bare. Let the ground be cool. There is nothing to prune tonight. There is nothing to harvest. There is only the long, deep breath of the mountain and your willingness to let it finally be enough. You are beginning to see that the suffering you felt was largely caused by your attempt to override your own season. You were trying to force a bloom when the earth was asking for sleep. And because you are starting to see this, the grip of your own internal struggle is already beginning to loosen. You are not losing your way. You are actually, for the first time in a long time, finally heading in the right direction. You are returning to the truth of your own rhythms. And that is a journey that will carry you into a much more stable peace than any amount of frantic, forced effort ever could. Stay with this feeling. Let the realization settle in your muscles and your bones. You have been holding on for so long, and you are finally beginning to see that the thing you were so afraid to lose, your own relevance or your own goodness, was never actually in danger. It was only hidden by the noise of your own resistance. Now, let us bring this wisdom closer to your own experience. You do not need to sit in any special way. You do not need to achieve a state of perfect stillness. If your mind is still pacing the halls of your to-do list, or if your heart feels a bit heavy with the residue of the day, that is perfectly fine. You are allowed to be exactly as you are. Just let your body find a position that feels supported, a place where you can finally stop holding yourself upright against the gravity of your own expectations. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so, or simply soften your gaze toward the dim light of the room. Take a breath, not to change the rhythm of your body, but to notice the simple, miraculous fact that you are breathing without effort. The air enters, the chest expands, and the air leaves, taking a little bit of the day's heat with it. Feel the weight of your heels, your hips, and your shoulders against the surface beneath you. The mountain does not have to pull itself into the sky. It simply exists, grounded and sure. You can do the same. In this quiet space, I invite you to bring to mind one of those worries you have been carrying lately. It might be a small concern about your work, or perhaps a lingering doubt about your own progress, or even a quiet, persistent fear that you are not quite enough. Do not dive into the story of the worry. You do not need to retrace the steps of why it exists or who is to blame. Just Let it appear in the theatre of your mind, like a single brittle twig lying on the forest floor. See it clearly for a moment. Notice its texture, its shape, and the way it seems to hold a bit of your energy just by being there. Now, imagine that you have a basket made of woven mountain grass, sitting right there on the earth beside you. This basket is meant for the harvest, but tonight it is meant for something else. It is meant to hold the things you are no longer required to carry in your own hands. Take that worry, that brittle, grey, dry twig of a thought, and, with a gentle, intentional movement, place it into the basket. You are not throwing it away. You are simply setting it down. You are moving it from the grip of your own spirit into the basket of your awareness. Notice what happens to your hand when you release it. Notice the way the muscles in your palm and your fingers soften. That tightening you have been feeling, that unconscious, frantic grip you have held on your life is starting to dissipate. You do not need to fix the twig. You do not need to paint it green or force it to bloom before its time. It can just sit there, in the basket, in the dark, and it can be exactly what it is. And because it is in the basket, you are free to stop staring at it. If your mind rushes back to the basket, trying to count the twigs or rearrange them, just notice that habit. That is, the orchardist. In you, the one who thinks work is only valid if it is visible. Smile at that habit if you can. It is a protective, frightened part of you that only wants you to be safe. But you can tell it that you are safe here, in the night, and that the basket is sturdy enough to hold whatever needs to be held. You are not abandoning your life, you are simply stepping away from the iron blade for a few hours. Take another slow, full breath. Let the exhale be longer than the inhale. As the breath leaves your lungs, imagine it traveling down into the deep, hidden roots of your own being. You are not a fragile, superficial growth. You are a vast, deep, and patient system. Whatever energy you feel you have lost during this busy, demanding season of your life is not gone. It is simply retreating into the roots, into the secret places where your resilience is stored. You are not being depleted. You are being replenished in a way that the surface cannot see. If you feel a sense of guilt for this stillness, name that guilt as well. See it as another twig, maybe a little thicker, maybe a little heavier, but still just a piece of wood. Place it into the basket too. There is plenty of room. The basket is deeper than your worry, and it is wider than your shame. You are safe enough to stop justifying your existence. You are safe enough to stop performing the role of the busy, productive gardener who never sleeps. The night is doing its work. The frost is settling over the orchards of the world, and in that cold, quiet embrace there is a profound, holy permission to stop. If you find that your thoughts are drifting, like clouds moving across a mountain peak, do not try to catch them. Do not try to anchor them to the earth. Let them drift. Let them be. The sky is not stained by the clouds, and your awareness is not stained by the thoughts that pass through it. You are the sky. You are the deep, abiding space that allows the weather to move. Every thought, every anxiety, and every regret is just a passing formation. It has no power to change the solid, true earth of who you are. Perhaps you might wonder if you will ever feel that vibrant, energetic, blossoming phase again. That is a natural question to ask. But for now, that is a question for the spring. You do not need the answer tonight. Tonight is for the wintering. Tonight is for the deep, dark soil. Tonight is for the realization that your bare branches are not a sign of failure, but a sign of a tree that is finally honestly resting. There is a quiet power in this choice. Every time you consciously place a worry into the basket, you are reclaiming your own strength. You are saying that your peace is not dependent on the outcome of your struggles. You are saying that you have the right to be dormant, to be unmeasured, and to be completely, deeply at rest. This is not giving up. This is coming home. As you breathe, imagine the forest around you. Imagine the trees standing in the dark, unmoving, unaffected by the pressure to provide, to change, or to be different than they are. They are perfectly content to be exactly what they are in this moment. They do not worry about the lack of sunlight. They do not doubt the return of the spring. They trust the rhythm. And you, dear friend, are part of that same rhythm. You are part of the same mountain. You are part of the same deep, ancient intelligence that knows, with absolute certainty, how to survive the cold. Nothing is required of you now. There are no more tools to carry. The iron blade is resting on the ground, long since forgotten. The basket is full of your worries, and it is sitting beside you, held by the earth. You are empty-handed, and you are open, and you are finally still. Notice the quiet. It is not an absence. It is a presence. It is the sound of your own life, settling into the bedrock of your true self. Stay here for a little longer, in this gentle space of release. You do not need to do anything at all. You have arrived. Years after Kaito had learned to set down his heavy iron blade, another seeker came to the mountain. This was a young monk named Sora, who arrived at the orchard during the deepest part of winter, when the ground was locked in iron and the sky was a heavy slate grey. Sora was not like Kaito, for he was not obsessed with the harvest of fruit. He was obsessed with the harvest of understanding. He came to the old, now quiet terrace with a single fragile object in his hands. It was a clay jar, delicate and unglazed, which he had spent months trying to fill with what he called the essence of his practice. He believed that if he could just sit in the right posture or breathe in the perfect rhythm, he would eventually capture the elusive, still center of his own mind within the jar. Sora was suffering, though his struggle was hidden behind a mask of serene discipline. He would sit for hours in the biting cold, his breath coming in sharp, shallow plumes, staring at the empty jar and waiting for a sense of profound clarity to fill it. When it did not, he would feel a surge of intense, secret despair. He believed his failure to capture this peace proved he was essentially flawed, a vessel that was either too small or too cracked to hold the wisdom he craved. He treated his own mind like a problem to be solved, and every time a stray thought or a feeling of anxiety rose to the surface, he reacted with a sharp internal recoil. He was constantly bracing, constantly tightening his grip on the jar, and constantly berating himself for the very movements of his heart that were as natural as the wind. He stayed in a small, unheated hut near the orchard. One afternoon, when the snow had begun to fall in thick, soft curtains that muffled the world, the master of the orchard, an elderly woman who had taken over the stewardship long ago, came to visit. She found Sora sitting by the cold hearth, his fingers white from gripping the clay jar, his eyes wide and weary. He told her of his quest. He showed her the empty jar and explained how he had tried to trap the stillness of the mountain within it, but that the stillness kept slipping away or turning into restless doubt. He asked her, with a voice that cracked, how he could make himself a better container so that his peace would finally stay. The woman did not look at the jar. She looked at the hearth, where a single dying coal was glowing faintly in the ashes. She reached out with a small iron tong, picked up the coal and dropped it into a heavy stone basin filled with water. There was a sudden, sharp hiss, a cloud of steam, and then a profound, damp silence. She turned to Sora and asked him what had become of the heat. Sora, confused, said it was gone, swallowed by the water. She shook her head, picked up a wet, black stone from the bottom of the basin, and placed it in Sora's open palm. The stone was cold, but it was still heavy, and it was still a stone. She told him that the heat had not been lost, but simply transformed into the quiet energy of the water. She then reached for the clay jar Sora had been holding. Sora hesitated, his hands trembling as he surrendered it. She did not set it on the floor. She walked to the window, opened the shutter, and let the falling snow fill the jar. Within moments, the jar was overflowing, the white flakes melting against the cool clay, turning into a simple, clear puddle. At the bottom, she set the jar down between them. She asked Sora if the jar was now full of the winter. He looked at the melting snow and said, "No, it was just water." She asked him why. He thought the stillness he sought was any different. She told him that he was trying to capture the mountain in a clay pot, trying to make the infinite, shifting reality of his own being fit into a narrow, static idea of what peace should look like. The jar was not meant to store the mountain. The jar was meant to be carried through the mountain. Sora felt a wave of resistance rise in his throat. He wanted to argue. He wanted to claim that if he just tried harder, if he just refined his method, he would eventually succeed. But as he looked at the wet stone in his palm and the melting water in the jar, he felt a strange, quiet collapse of his own internal defenses. He realized that the jar was not his savior, but his cage. He had been so focused on the container that he had forgotten to simply live. He had been so afraid of the stray thoughts and the rising anxieties that he had treated his own life like a dangerous intruder that needed to be locked away. He didn't magically become enlightened. In that moment, the feeling of being not enough didn't vanish. But he did something he had never done before. He stopped, trying to force the lid onto the jar. He took a long, slow breath, a breath that went all the way down into his belly, and, instead of bracing against the cold, he let his shoulders drop. He looked at the melting snow, and, for the first time, he didn't call it a failure. He just called it water. He didn't call his wandering mind a disaster. He just called it thinking. The transformation was small, almost invisible to anyone else. It was simply the choice to stop fighting the reality of his own experience. When a wave of self-judgment rose up, telling him he was wasting his time, he didn't grab the iron tongs of his discipline to strike it down. He just noticed it, like a shadow, passing over the floor, and let it move on. He didn't need the jar to be perfect anymore. He didn't need the peace to be a solid object he could hold and verify. He was content to be a person who was sometimes clear and sometimes clouded, just like the mountain sky. He spent the rest of the winter in that hut, but he didn't spend it gripping the jar. He left the jar on the wooden table, sometimes full of snow, sometimes full of rain, sometimes just sitting empty and dry in the light of the morning. He learned that the stillness wasn't something you captured. It was something you entered by letting go of the need to be the one who controls the weather. He became a man who moved with less effort. When the snow fell, he watched it. When he felt the sharp sting of doubt, he breathed into it, making space for it rather than slamming the door in its face. He learned to sit with the uncertainty of the winter, not because he was a master, but because he was finally tired of pretending. He could stop the seasons from turning. He realized that the suffering he had been carrying, the weight of his own high expectations, was the very thing that had made his heart feel like a stone in a basin of water. And as the winter began to fade into the first tentative warmth of early spring, he didn't suddenly ascend to some higher state of being. He simply walked out into the orchard, left the clay jar behind on the table, and began to help the steward with the simple necessary work of the day. He was still Sora. He was still a man who had moments of worry and moments of fear. But he was no longer a man who believed that his peace depended on keeping the jar sealed. He was finally, truly, out in the open, where the wind could touch him and where he could finally begin to grow in the same way the mountain grows, one slow, unforced season at a time. This story of the jar and the snow is a mirror for your own life. You too have been carrying a jar, trying to fill it with a version of yourself that never feels quite good enough or never feels quite calm enough. You have been waiting for the moment when you are finally filled with enough wisdom or enough success or enough certainty so that you can stop worrying. But peace is not a liquid you pour into a pot. It is the wide open sky that the pot is sitting in. When you stop focusing on the vessel, when you stop trying to make the container perfect, you start to notice the sky. You start to notice that you are not the jar. You are the space. And that space is already whole, regardless of whether your life is currently melting or freezing or overflowing. Notice how your body feels when you hear this. Does there feel like a slight loosening in the chest, a softening in the neck? You are not being asked to destroy your discipline, or to abandon your path, or to stop caring about your life. You are only being asked to stop using your practice as a hammer to beat yourself into submission. You are only being asked to let the jar sit on the table, empty or full, and to trust that you are still you. Underneath it all, you are still the one who is breathing, the one who is witnessing, the one who is present. And that is more than enough. You have been trying to solve the problem of being human, but being human isn't a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be experienced. And the moment you stop trying to keep the lid on, the mystery begins to breathe. You have been looking at the orchard of your own mind, seeing the bare branches and the frost-covered ground, and you have been interpreting these things as evidence of your own decline. But let us look closer at the mechanism of this suffering. When the wind of life changes, when a season of loss or exhaustion arrives, that is simply the weather of existence. It is the first movement, the natural shift that comes to every living thing. It is not an error. It is not a sign of your unworthiness. But then, the mind begins its secondary, frantic labor. It starts to build a wall against the wind. It starts to gather up the fallen leaves and desperately try to glue them back onto the branches, screaming that the orchard must look like a summer forest, even when the thermometer is dropping. This secondary labor is the source of your deepest fatigue. It is the effort of resistance, the sheer, exhausting work of pretending that you can command the seasons to stop shifting. When you feel a pang of loneliness or a wave of doubt, that is the first pain. It is a feeling like the touch of cold air on your skin. But when you add the layer of judgment, when you tell yourself that you should not be lonely or that you are failing because you are doubting, you have created a second wound. You are not just feeling the cold anymore. You are now fighting the cold, blaming yourself for the cold, and terrified that the cold will never end. This judgment is the iron blade you have been holding against your own heart, trying to prune away your own humanity. Look at how the mind clings to the idea of control as if it were a life raft in a storm. You rehearse the future, playing out scenarios where you are finally perfect, finally finished, finally secure. You replay the past, trying to smooth out the rough edges of your own story so that you can present a version of yourself that is safe from criticism. You do this because you are afraid. You are afraid that if you show the world your true, seasonal self, with your moments of barrenness and your times of quiet withdrawal, you will be seen as empty, as failing, or as less than. You have turned your own pain into an identity. You have become so accustomed to the weight of your own resistance that you no longer recognize yourself without it. The Buddhist wisdom here is not that you must stop feeling pain. It is that you must stop feeding the fire that turns that pain into agony. When you find yourself replaying a moment of regret, notice the hunger of the mind. It is hungry for a different outcome. It is hungry for a version of the past that never existed. This is the craving for a reality that is not currently here. By constantly focusing on what is missing, you are starving the present moment of the only nourishment it can offer you, which is the simple truth of your own presence. You are here. That is enough. You do not need to be anywhere else to be worthy of peace. Think of your self-judgment as a kind of frost that doesn't just cover the trees, but tries to freeze the very sap inside them. When you shame yourself for your tiredness, you are not protecting your orchard. You are starving the roots. The roots of your well-being require a different kind of care. They require the gentle allowance of your own humanity. They need you to acknowledge that you are a part of nature and that nature does not apologize for its cycles. A tree does not hold a grudge against itself for shedding its leaves in autumn. It does not feel shame for being dormant. It simply trusts that the energy it is storing away is necessary for its future survival. You have been trying to fix yourself through the agency of shame, believing that if you are hard enough on yourself, you will somehow force a change. But shame is not a fuel for growth. It is a poison for the spirit. It creates a brittle, rigid shell that makes it impossible for you to absorb the quiet, essential lessons of your winter. True growth is not about forcing the branches to grow in the dark. It is about trusting that in the dark the work is being done. The work of healing, the work of processing, and the work of integrating are not visible to the eye of the achiever. They are silent, slow, and profound. If you stop the internal war for just one moment, you might find that the suffering is not as solid as you believed. It is made of thoughts, and thoughts are made of nothing more than the movement of your own awareness. When you stop grabbing the thoughts and pinning them to the wall of your identity, they begin to drift. They lose their charge. The fear of uncertainty loses its teeth when you stop treating uncertainty as a catastrophe. Uncertainty is just the blank space where the next moment is waiting to be written. It is not an enemy. It is a canvas. You may be worried that if you stop resisting, you will disappear. You may fear that without your high standards and your constant self-critique, you will become aimless or lazy. But this is the final, desperate lie of the ego. The ego believes that it is the master of the orchard, that without its constant interference, everything will wither. But the orchard has its own intelligence, a far more ancient and capable intelligence than your fearful thoughts could ever provide. When you step aside, you do not vanish, you emerge. You emerge from the shadow of your own projections and you finally begin to occupy your own life. This is the shift in relationship we are practicing. You are still a person with responsibilities. You are still someone who wants to thrive, but you are no longer the one who has to manufacture the sunrise. You are learning to be the witness of your own life, the one who watches the seasons turn with a steady, kind, and observant heart. When the doubt comes, you say, "Ah, there is doubt. It is not a death sentence. It is just a traveler passing through." When the exhaustion comes, you say, "Ah, there is exhaustion. It is not a failure. It is just a need for rest." This is the great, quiet freedom. You are finally allowing your life to be what it is, rather than what you think it should be. You are releasing the iron blade. You are putting down the clay jar. And you are stepping into the wide, cold, and beautiful air of the present. The pain that life brings will still visit you. That is the nature of being alive. But the extra suffering, the layer of judgment, the shame, and the constant battle against your own seasons, that can end. It can end the moment you decide that you are tired of fighting the mountain. You have been carrying these patterns for so long that they feel like your skin. You have been holding on so tight that your knuckles are white. But the mountain does not ask you to hold it. The orchard does not ask you to justify its existence. Everything is unfolding according to its own rhythm, and you are a part of that rhythm. You are not the gardener who must force the harvest. You are the tree. You are the root. You are the very soil itself. And in the soil, there is no judgment. There is only the long, slow, and holy process of becoming exactly who you are meant to be in this season. Take a breath, a long, steady pull of air into your lungs. Feel it move through your chest, reaching into the deepest, most hidden corners of your own being. You have been trying to solve your whole life tonight, and it is time to stop. You have been trying to make the winter look like spring, and it is time to stop. You are safe. You are held by the night, and you are supported by the very ground that you have been walking on your entire life. You are not behind. You are exactly where the season has brought you, and that is the only place you can possibly be. Let this sink in. Let the words fall away, and let the quiet truth remain. You do not have to be anything other than what you are right now. A person who is breathing, a person who is resting, and a person who is finally coming home to the stillness. You might wonder how this wisdom holds up when the sun rises and the quiet mountain of your meditation is replaced by the noisy, urgent demands of your actual life. It is easy to find clarity when you are sitting in the dim light of your room. But how do you carry the orchardist's lesson into a Tuesday afternoon when the phone is buzzing with demands, or when you are lying awake at 3 a.m, replaying a mistake that feels as fresh as if it happened 10 minutes ago? The transition from the stillness of this practice to the chaos of the world is where the real work happens. It is not about keeping your mind frozen in a state of absolute calm. It is about learning to recognize the arrival of the frost in the middle of your day and deciding not to reach for the iron blade. Consider the moments when you are waiting for a response, perhaps a text or an email that feels like a judgment on your worth. The heart begins to race. The mind starts building a bridge of anxious scenarios, and you feel the familiar, gripping urge to fix, control, or force an outcome that is completely beyond your reach. In that moment, you are standing in your orchard, trying to pull the leaves open to make the tree grow faster. But what if you just paused? What if you took one breath, felt the air move through your chest, and acknowledged that the anxiety you feel is just a piece of weather. You do not have to obey the alarm bell ringing in your mind. You do not have to assume that the silence on the other end is a reflection of your own inadequacy. You can hold your own space, even when the wait is uncomfortable, and trust that your value is not a harvest that needs to be constantly protected. Or think of those nights when your brain feels like it is running a marathon, replaying past conversations where you wish you had said something more clever, more kind, or more firm. You are trying to rewrite the history of your own life, believing that if you could just get the script right, the pain would disappear. But the past is a branch that has already dropped its leaves. You cannot force them back onto the wood. When you catch yourself doing this, notice the hunger of the mind. It wants to go back to the scene of the struggle, because it thinks that by fighting the battle again, it can finally win. But the battle is over. The only thing you are winning by replaying it is a fresh layer of exhaustion. You can simply say to yourself, "This is the mind. It is trying to protect me, but it is just remembering, and I do not have to join the replay." We often compare ourselves to others, scrolling through images of lives that seem to be in a permanent, golden summer. We see their achievements, their smooth transitions, their apparent ease, and we feel a sharp, biting shame for our own quiet, cold seasons. We feel that we are falling behind, as if life were a race with a finish line that moves every time we get close. But remember the orchard. You do not compare the health of a tree in December to the beauty of a flower in May. They are not competing, they are participating in different parts of the same necessary cycle. Your season of dormancy is just as valuable as anyone else's season of blossoming. It is the time when you are building the strength to endure, when you are deepening your roots into the reality of who you truly are. Even the simple, everyday act of smiling when you feel heavy inside is a habit that can be met with compassion. You are trying to be kind, trying to be strong for those you love, and there is beauty in that. But there is also a cost if you never allow yourself the space to be honest about your fatigue. You do not have to wear the mask of constant productivity. You can be someone who shows up, does the work, and cares deeply while also being someone who admits that they are tired. You can tell yourself, "I am doing my best," and my best today might mean that I am in the wintering phase. That is not a failure of character. That is an honest assessment of the landscape. You might feel guilty for resting, as if you have to earn the right to exist by showing a constant stream of output. This is the ego, trying to prove that it is in control. But you are not a machine, you are a human being. And your rest is not a luxury or a reward for good behavior. It is a biological and spiritual necessity. When you finally allow yourself to sink into the couch or crawl into bed, without the burden of having to justify your day, you are reclaiming your own humanity. You are saying that you are worth something simply because you are alive, regardless of what you manage to finish, solve, or fix. There is a discipline to this, a gentle but firm practice of choosing where to put your energy. It is the practice of noticing when the iron blade is in your hand and gently, firmly setting it back on the ground. It is the practice of observing the jar you have been trying to fill, noticing that it is already full of the present moment and deciding that you don't need to hold the lid down anymore. This takes courage. It takes the willingness to be seen as someone who is not always on, someone who is not always fighting, and someone who is not always winning. But you will find that as you soften, the world does not collapse. In fact, it becomes a much more interesting place to inhabit. You will still have days where you react. You will still have moments where the urge to control is overwhelming. You will still have times where the winter feels too cold and you want to be anywhere else. That is normal. That is part of the cycle. Transformation is not a straight line up a mountain. It is a spiral, coming back to the same lessons over and over. But each time with a little more space, a little more patience, and a little less sharpness. You are not starting from zero every time you fail. You are building the capacity to return to yourself. So, tomorrow, when you feel the pinch of pressure or the cold bite of a regret, see if you can meet it with a bit of the mountain stillness. See if you can acknowledge the feeling without turning it into an identity. See if you can breathe into the tightness in your chest and allow it to exist. You are practicing the art of being a steward of your own presence. You are learning to let the seasons come and go, knowing that beneath the shifting weather, the root is holding on and the life is continuing, exactly as it should, in the quiet, dark, and holy space of your own heart. Nothing is lost. Nothing is truly broken. You are only coming into a deeper, truer relationship with the life you are actually living. The iron blade you once carried is now merely a memory, a cold weight you have finally set down on the forest floor. The clay jar you tried to fill with the essence of stillness sits empty and unglazed on the table, no longer a vessel for your expectations, but a simple, humble thing in the soft light of the night. You are not the blade, and you are not the jar. You are the orchard itself. You are the deep, dark soil that receives the frost, the dormant branches that hold their breath in the moonlight, and the hidden, vibrant life that persists beneath the bark when the world has stopped asking for fruit. Feel the floor beneath you, solid and unmoving. It is the earth that supports the trees. It is the earth that supports your rest. Let your limbs grow heavy, like branches laden with the quiet of the coming winter. There is nothing left for you to prune. There is no patch of ground that needs your urgent attention. The mountain is taking care of itself, and the night is doing the work that you could never do with your conscious mind. The frost is settling, and that is not a disaster. It is a cleansing. It is a cooling. It is the gentle way the world tells you that it is time to stop reaching, time to stop producing, and time to finally be held. Your breath is slowing, tracing the rhythm of the valley. In, a slow expansion of the roots. Out, a deep sinking into the bedrock of your own existence. You do not have to watch the horizon for the first light of spring. You do not have to worry that the orchard will be forgotten while you sleep. The mountain remembers, the roots remember, the intelligence that guides the seasons has been with you every step of the way, even in the moments when you felt most brittle, most bare, and most lost. You are returning to that intelligence now. You are returning to the silent, ancient trust that exists before the mind begins to name the world. Let the thoughts that remain be like the last few leaves of the season, falling silently, one by one, onto the dark earth. They have served their purpose. They have given you their color, and they have caught the light of your attention for long enough. Now they can go. Now they can return to the soil, nourishing the very ground from which your next season will eventually arise. You do not need to rake them up. You do not need to catalogue them. You are allowed to let the ground cover them, one by one, until the forest floor is clear, open, and at peace. There is a profound softness in this. There is a safety in knowing that you are finally off the hook. You have been a good steward of your own life, even when you were afraid and even when you were fighting the cold. You have carried the weight with all the courage you had, but the time for carrying has ended. The iron blade is gone. The jar is empty. The orchard is quiet. You are finally, completely, free to be the guest of the night rather than its master. The air in the room is cool, and it carries the stillness of the mountain with it. It touches your skin like a quiet blessing. Your eyes are heavy, your jaw is loose, and the tension that has lived in your shoulders for so long is finally melting away into the dark. You are safe in the dark. The dark is not an absence. It is the space where the true, deep work of your soul continues, unseen and unhurried. You do not need to be awake to understand it. You do not need to be busy to be good. You are, quite simply, here, and here is enough. Everything you have worried about, every plan you have made, and every mistake you have replayed is fading into the shadows of the valley. It does not matter if the orchard is perfectly ordered tonight. It does not matter if the trees look like they are failing. The life within them is secure. The life within you is secure. You are sinking deeper into the soft, velvet silence of the world, and there is nothing to fear. The cycle is turning, as it has always turned, and you are being carried along with it, held in the cradle of the night. Think of the mountain peak, white with snow, untouched by the noise of the valley below. You are that peak. You are the stillness that remains when the storms have passed. You are the light that is reflected in the water, even when the surface is slightly ruffled by the wind. You have come such a long way to reach this moment, to arrive at this threshold where you can finally stop, let go, and let the night take the weight for you. You have done more than enough. You have been the witness of your own life, and that is a task you have fulfilled with a heart that never stopped trying to find its way home. The path is clear now. It leads away from the urgency, away from the judgment, and away from the desperate need to be finished. It leads right here, to this breath, to this heaviness, to this gentle surrender. Sleep is the bridge that takes you back to your own truth. It is the deep, restorative winter that you have been waiting for, the moment when the outer world dissolves and the inner world can finally, fully breathe. You can let go of the last few threads of awareness now. You can let the story end, let the images fade, and let the quietness become the only thing that is real. You are tucked away in the safety of the night, and there is nothing in the world that can disturb the peace that is already waiting for you in the center of your own heart. The cycle will continue without your help. The orchard will wait for you. The spring will arrive in its own perfect time. But for now, there is only the cooling air, the settling weight of your body, and the deep, abiding quiet of the mountain. If the life you were trying to hold was actually the wind, and if the peace you were looking for was the breath that let it go, what would be left of you when the night finally held you in its arms?